Everybody, thanks for tuning in. So, today we are going to talk about William Cronon's essay, The Trouble with Wilderness or Getting Back to the Wrong Nature. It's a really great essay and it's got a lot of moving parts in it. We're going to cover all that, but before we do, I want to discuss the social contract because I really think that the social contract is really a key portion and a key component here to environmentalism. You really can't interpret environmentalism correctly unless you go into the social contract. And the reason being is because the social contract really conflicts with environmentalism on a lot of levels. And that's why society and cultures and everything have fundamentally clashed with different environmental policies, regulations, and everything. So, if humanity was to be in its most primitive state, we would essentially be killing each other for our resources, stealing, and just living in chaos. So, society as a whole has decided that it would be better to construct a social contract. And what the social contract is it means constructing a government, constructing laws, policies, and punishments and enforcements that keep people from acting into their most primitive states. And the main reason that a social contract was really created was to protect property. And when I mean property, I don't mean land and stuff like that. I mean to protect your possessions, your food, your just all the possessions that you have, so you aren't killed for them, or you're not stolen from. And of course, that stuff does happen today, but because we live in a social contract, it happens a lot less. And that is one of the things that we have. We have governments in place and laws and regulations in place that put society and the individuals within society on an equal playing ground and says that this is how we are supposed to treat each other. And if you go outside of that, there is going to be consequences. So when you look at the social contract, every social contract varies, and it varies on culture, really. And when you look at it, there's cultures that have developed their social contract around religion. There's cultures that have developed their social contract around economics and money, and it just really varies. Well, the problem is what we see here with environmentalism is it really conflicts with a lot of the social contract. So humanity really struggles to try to do what's right within a social contract, but also do what's right within environmentalism. So it becomes this fundamental battle between the social contract that we have created for ourselves and the forward progression of environmentalism. And currently, that's what we're dealing with right now. But we're going to go into William Cronon, and we're going to see how the social contract and all that really plays into what Cronon is trying to say here in this essay. So Cronon really opens up with this essay of wilderness is a creation of man. And so you really have to think about that. What Cronon's trying to say here is that when you go to Yellowstone or you go to Yosemite or any place that's protected, it's not natural. The fact that there is controls set on it, rules, regulations, the fact that there's essentially a fence around these areas, it's man-made. It's all been created by man. Now, Cronon isn't saying that this is necessarily wrong, but he's just pointing out the fact that when you think that you're going into this pristine, untouched wilderness where man doesn't exist, it's really just a facade because man created this. This isn't natural. This confine that we have right here that we've placed around this section of land is not natural. So he gets into and he makes the point of how culture really impacts and viewpoints really impact on why we preserve the places that we preserve and protect the ones that we protect and let others go away. So a lot of it is, religious value, from culture and stuff like that from the past. The other is history. So when you look at the American frontier and you look at you know, why the Thunder Basin, for example, is being preserved. Well, it's the final the final little chunk of the frontier. The grasslands um, is manifest destiny. When you think of manifest destiny, you think of westward expansion. You think of the grasslands. You think about coming out west, but more importantly, you think about the cowboy and all that, and everything that was portrayed in the Virginian and other novels such as that. Because for America, our culture and our past, and for most everybody, is very traditions are for humans are very important. They're very crucial to us. So when we're preserving places that don't have this awe-inspiring beauty, we really look to cultural values. So if it doesn't really appease our eyes, does it appease our culture? Does it really preserve that culture that we have? And that's one of the reasons that you see places like the Thunder Basin that's being preserved is fundamentally the West is America. And even though America started on the East and moved west, the image of the cowboy and the image of, all that just really is what defines America. So, especially from people in different cultures, when they think of Americans, they think of cowboys. So, you know, um, protecting our wilderness has a lot of meaning. And like I said, it goes into historical, cultural, religious, and recreation. And recently, it's been made into health. So the thing about it is, a lot of environmentalists, and this is what Cronon really wants to state, is that environmentalists usually try to pick a drastic polar on either side. So what ends up happening is you have environmentalists that say we need to have a place that's completely untouched by humanity. Well, that doesn't fit into the social contract because you really can't have a place that's completely untouched by humanity. If you were going to have a place that would be completely untouched by humanity, that would equate to suicide. And so everybody killing themselves just isn't realistic. So we preserve these lands and we preserve these places because it's what fits into our social contract. And for America, our social contract is economics. Our social contract is capitalism. So when we think of environmentalism, you can't think about protecting the environment without protecting capitalism. So America has fought tooth and toenail against socialism, against globalization, against communism. So anytime environmentalism is trying to make any movement forward, it has to be mindful of our capitalist society. Otherwise, it comes into a gridlock and nothing gets done. And so, um, because of that, we live in this capitalist society. The wilderness experience, and this is what Cronon really also discusses, is the wilderness experience rewards upper class. And that's how capitalism works. The upper class gets rewarded and the lower class gets punished. Because we live in this capitalist society, um, these preservation places have been deemed as moneymakers, as places where you can go visit, and it's for tourism. So environmentalism has had to work around capitalism in order to make it work. If you want something to be preserved in the United States, you have to make it monetarily beneficial. Otherwise, it doesn't really get done. So, you know, and that's a lot of been what's with the social contract has been classes get punished and classes get rewarded, whether it's gender, race, or just monetary. So Cronon really discusses that he says that humanity needs to find the middle ground here. And what he's really describing here is finding that middle ground in between a social contract and that middle ground between environmentalism. Well, one thing that can be argued with that is, at what point is the middle ground really correct? At what point is the social contract broken? And I think that that's one of my biggest critiques with Cronon, is he tries to find a middle ground between the social contract and environmentalism. But that doesn't mean that just because you find a middle ground, that it is the correct answer. It just means the environmentalists got a little bit of what they wanted, and the capitalists got a little bit of what they wanted, and we're both okay with it. But that doesn't mean it's the best for the capitalist or the economy, and it doesn't mean that's the best for the environmentalist. So one of the things is, you have to really, when deciphering this middle ground, you have to reach out and say, should we not always try to find the middle ground? Should we not always try to accommodate everybody in the best way possible? And it needs to, at some point, be an issue of what is correct. Despite the money, despite the politics, despite the social contract, the environmentalist, what is correct? Well, and that's what everybody's been debating on since the beginning, of what is completely correct, because everybody has different values, everybody's got different beliefs and viewpoints, and that's what we really fight with right now. But with that being said, Cronon also talks about how wilderness distances us from issues at home. And it's really interesting, because when you look at outside of the wilderness and you take issues that are here on the home front, right outside your front door, whether it's polluted water or it's, tainted food or any of those things, you really have to sit there and say that we're over here fighting for these preservations such as Yellowstone and all these other places, which is no means discredited or, unwarranted even. But what about the issues at home? What about the pollution that we see in our cities? What about the chemicals that are in our food? And William Cronon really brings that home, is, the best way to really fight for environmentalism isn't to be fighting clear across the country or clear across your state. Start at home. Try to fix the issues that's currently at home. Because things eventually, if everybody fixes what's right outside their front door, eventually it spreads and it becomes an accumulative whole of everything getting fixed. So it's a really interesting point that he brings up, because so many people, when you talk about environmentalism or environmental issues, they talk about big picture issues. They talk about the ocean, they talk about the rainforest, they talk about all that stuff, which in no means should be discounted. But we do have to take smaller steps to get to the larger whole, and that is worrying about what's outside your front door. So, the other thing that Cronon talks about is how the viewpoint, it's changing this whole viewpoint of environmentalism, because the wilderness rewards beauty moreover than, importance. So just because something holds important value to the ecosystem doesn't mean that it's going to be preserved. That's why when you look at the Tetons and, you look at Yosemite and the Redwoods and Yellowstone, all those places, they're beautiful. And so people want to preserve those, because that is where they want to go spend their recreational time. But when you look at other places, such as maybe the Thunder Basin, which isn't as beautiful, or the desert out in Arizona, people are more hesitant to preserve those places because they don't want to spend their recreation there. You have to think about it. Nobody wants to make a vacation to go to the Thunder Basin and go hike through the Thunder Basin. But there are people who want to go to Yellowstone, and they want to go have grizzly bear encounters and things of that nature. So, again, it goes back to that social contract. because people want to spend their recreation at certain places get preserved more over than others. So, and that's one of the fundamental things that as a collective whole, humanity needs to really be more aware of and more conscious of, because you have to preserve the things that matter. Because if you're just preserving the things that hold, beauty or historical value, yeah, that stuff is great, but it's also going to add to the decline of the ecosystem and the decline of the earth. So we have to sit there and think of what holds more value scientifically versus what pleases me socially. So, he also talks about these bipolar beliefs that, you have on one end people who have environmental values for the land because they're ranching on it or agriculture. You have people who want to spend their recreational time there. Then you have the far-leaning environmentalists who want to preserve these lands where people just don't step foot into them, which nobody's right or wrong. It's just a matter of culture, a matter of how people make their living, and a matter of what they believe is most important into their life. Because people as a whole are going to value the things that are most important to them. So if you're a rancher and your whole livelihood is, cattle ranching, your environmental value isn't going to be to destroy the land. It's going to be to preserve the land, but it's going to be for ranching, where your environmentalism is going to say, or your environmentalist is going to say, listen, like, that's not naturally what's on this land. You need to give up the ranching. So you have these bipolar beliefs that just go all over the place here. And again, it falls within the social contract. And in order to make these changes, in order to get at the heart of environmentalism and to fix environmentalism, society as a whole is going to have to come together and rearrange these social contracts that have been implemented and have been a part of our life since the beginning. And I think that that's what William Cronon is really trying to tease out, is that we have this struggle between environmentalism and a social contract. But what I find William Cronon's big flaw is he tries to find that middle ground between environmentalism and a social contract. And in my opinion, it's a complete revolving door that will never get fixed. Nothing far right or far left is going to get fixed 100%. We're just going to be keeping things straight and center down the median. And that's not always what's best. And I think that for environmentalists, we do have to work within a social contract, because it's what dictates our laws. It's what dictates our society and how we live. So currently we do have to work within that confine of the social contract. But socially, we need to be trying to expand out of this social contract and trying to replace this social contract with something larger, something that is more accommodating of the larger whole of Earth and societies and just collectively everything. So that way we can make strides forward instead of just straddling that median and just going in a straight trajectory that has a means to no end and no true real results. We have to achieve at some point an ends to all this, where humanity and the environment are in a constant symbiotic relationship with each other, where we are sustaining ourselves and while the environment is also able to sustain itself. Because when you look at environmental issues, you look at most of the issues that we have, we are not able to just let them be and sustain themselves. We have to have constant protection over them. We have to have constant monitoring. And we have to eventually wean the environment off of that. And the only way to do that is to really break down the social contract that we have and really start re-outlining that social contract, redefining what is important to humanity and what is important to our longevity, our survival, our resources, and everything accumulatively. And so, though William Cronon does make a lot of very, very great points, and he outlines his essay very well, and it's definitely a truly phenomenal essay. I think that, again, we have to really come to a middle ground in the sense of not between environmentalism and the social contract, but a middle ground of breaking out of this social contract that we have and redefining it and recreating that social contract so it works for the environment, humanity, and the cultural values and environmentalism and just everything. So, anyway, I hope this sheds some light on William Cronon. I hope it sheds some light on the social contract. And more importantly, though, the big takeaway that I hope you get out of this is I hope it sheds some light on the fundamental issues that environmentalists deal with policy and, with society, culture, and all that stuff, with big issues in order for preservation and conservation. So if you have any comments, like always, drop them in the comment section. I promise I'll get back to you. And thank you for tuning in.